The room fell silent the moment Elijah stepped in. The doors to the marble conference hall slammed shut behind him with a thud that echoed like a warning shot. The silence wasn't just from surprise. It was coated with a thick layer of judgment, disbelief, and quiet disdain. Elijah King, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a custom Navy suit that hugged him like armor, walked across the room with a calmness that felt confrontational. His skin was deep brown, his hair cropped low, and his eyes scanned the room like a man who'd seen every version of the world and survived it. On the far side of the room stood Donovan Hale, partner at Wexler and Hale, one of the most ruthless corporate law firms in New York City. He was standing with a group of white men in expensive suits, their laughter dying mid-air as Elijah approached. Donovan turned, drink in hand, smile already plastered across his face, assuming this man in the impeccable suit was some guest's bodyguard, driver, or, at best, a +1. "Can I help you?" Donovan asked, tilting his head without offering a hand. His voice was syrupy with condescension. Elijah stopped 3 feet in front of him. "I believe we're scheduled to meet." Elijah King. Donovan blinked. The name registered vaguely. A high-stakes case. A joint legal negotiation with Sterling Global Ventures. Hale's firm was in talks with them for a billion-dollar merger. But Donovan had never met the man from SGV. In person, he'd just assumed the lead counsel would look more familiar. "Oh," Donovan said, eyes narrowing. "You're King." "That's right." Elijah extended his hand, professionally, not smiling. Donovan looked at the hand, then looked at Elijah, then slowly put his glass down and turned to his colleagues. "Gentlemen, give us a minute," he said. Then, with a chuckle, he added, "Gotta deal with the King." The others laughed. Elijah didn't. When they were alone, Donovan looked again at the hand, still waiting to be shaken. With a slight smirk, he adjusted his cufflinks instead. "I'm not really a handshake guy," he said. Elijah let the hand drop, slowly, keeping his expression unreadable. "I see." There was a beat of silence, thick and choking. Donovan crossed his arms. "Look, I'm going to be real with you. You're late. We expected someone else. No offense, but we were told Sterling was sending their best. They did," Elijah said calmly. Donovan scoffed, then gestured toward the table. "All right, fine. Let's get this over with." They sat. The negotiation began with a stiffness that quickly escalated to open hostility. Every time Elijah spoke, Donovan interrupted. Every clause he proposed was dismissed without consideration. Elijah's demeanor never changed. He remained calm, surgical, and precise. But behind his quiet confidence was a storm building, slow and ominous. 3 hours in, Donovan leaned back in his chair, exasperated. "Jesus, King. I don't know what kind of operation you're running over at Sterling, but over here, we play by rules." Elijah looked up from his papers. "You mean your rules? They've worked for decades. For people like you," Elijah said, voice even. "But let me tell you something. Hale, the game's changing. And if you can't see that, then you're already obsolete." Donovan's jaw twitched. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Before Donovan could respond, the doors opened again. In walked a woman in a sharp red dress, flanked by 2 men in suits. She looked directly at Elijah and nodded. "Mr. King, they're ready for you in the other room." Elijah stood, collected his papers, and without looking at Donovan said, "I'll see you at the board vote, assuming you're still representing Wexler and Hale by then." And then he walked out. Donovan sat there, blinking. What the hell just happened? That night, Donovan was still fuming. He sat in his high-rise penthouse, swirling a glass of scotch, trying to understand how the meeting had slipped out of his control. He prided himself on reading people, controlling rooms, bending negotiations to his will. But that man, Elijah King, had turned the entire dynamic upside down, and it bothered him deeply. So he started digging. At first, he found nothing. No Ivy League school, no high-profile family name, no old boy network. But then something caught his eye. a law school in Atlanta, top of his class, a few articles on racial equity and systemic bias in corporate law, a high-profile lawsuit against the NYPD that had settled for millions. Then came the bombshell. Elijah King wasn't just any lawyer. He was the legal architect behind three of the most significant civil rights settlements in the last decade. He had been quietly, powerfully reshaping corporate accountability in America and doing it without fanfare. He was also a majority shareholder in Sterling Global Ventures, not just legal counsel, a partner, an owner. Donovan's hand froze mid-scroll. The man he had refused to shake hands with owned more of the company he was trying to partner with than anyone in the room. The legal guy was, in fact, the king, literally and figuratively. Donovan stood up too fast, the scotch spilling onto the floor. No, 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 no. The next morning, Elijah arrived early at the boardroom. Sterling Global had acquired an entire floor in the Hudson Tower, floor-to-ceiling glass, black marble tables, views of the city that made men feel godlike. Donovan walked in 10 minutes late. This time, he extended his hand first. Mr. King. Elijah didn't take it. Not really a handshake guy. He said deadpan. Donovan's face turned a shade paler, but he recovered quickly, putting on a grin. Touche. The board meeting began, and every time Elijah spoke, people listened. His legal insight was razor sharp. His understanding of finance, market strategy, risk exposure, it was all world class. Even Donovan's own partners started deferring to him. At the end of the meeting, the vote was unanimous. Sterling would merge, but only under the terms Elijah proposed. Donovan followed him out. King, listen. About the other day, you mean when you looked at me and decided I was beneath you? Donovan flinched. It wasn't like that. No. Elijah stopped walking and turned to him. Then tell me, what was it like? Donovan had no answer. Elijah leaned in, voice low. I've spent my entire life walking into rooms like that. Rooms full of men like you. Men who think the world was made for them, and that anyone who looks like me is either a threat or a fluke. But here's the truth. You don't own those rooms anymore. And the next time you get the urge to look down on someone because of the color of their skin, remember this. One day, that person might own the company you're trying to impress. With that, Elijah walked away. Donovan stood in the hallway, alone, surrounded by glass and gold and silence. For the first time in his life, he felt something new, small, and somewhere deep inside him, a flicker of something even more foreign. Shame. Donovan Hale returned to his office that afternoon with a 1,000-yard stare and a silence that unsettled even his most hardened associates. Behind closed doors, his fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and his mind reeled. He had built his career on power dynamics, on knowing how to win before the game even began. But Elijah King had rewritten the rules in front of him, and he hadn't even raised his voice. He stared at the skyline for a long time, ignoring calls, emails, even his assistant's soft knocks on the door. The man he'd dismissed without a thought had turned out to be the one man holding the keys to his firm's future, and he had blown it. Damn it, he muttered under his breath, pacing. Then louder, damn it, he swept the files off his desk in a fury. Papers scattered across the floor like shrapnel, but nothing gave him peace. Every word, every look from Elijah played back in his mind like a punishment. How had he misjudged so badly? Elijah, on the other hand, walked through the Sterling offices with quiet dignity. His assistant, Maya, a young woman fresh out of Columbia, rushed to his side, holding a tablet. Mr. King, just wanted to say, that was incredible. You shut him down without even raising your voice. Elijah smiled faintly. There's no need to shout when you're holding the truth. She beamed, then whispered, they're already talking about you upstairs. The partners are calling it the King Clause. The way you cornered him on the liability carve-out. Legend. Elijah chuckled softly. Let them talk. We've got work to do. He disappeared into his office, a sanctuary of dark walnut, books, and calm. On his desk was a framed photo of a modest home in Georgia, his childhood house. Next to it, another picture, his mother, in scrubs, standing proudly in front of a community clinic. She had raised him alone, scrubbed floors, took double shifts, and she'd made him promise something the day he got into law school. "Don't just make it, baby," she'd said, holding his face. "Make sure you change it for the ones who come after you." He hadn't forgotten. The fallout was swift. Donovan's partners at Wexler and Hale were not forgiving. "You insulted him," one of them demanded in the emergency meeting. "Do you have any idea who he is? He's more than counsel, he's one of their managing directors." Donovan held his ground. "I didn't know. That's the point," another snapped. "You didn't ask. You walked into that room with your head so far up your own ego. You couldn't see the future when it was staring you in the face." They debated removing him from the Sterling account entirely. Some wanted him suspended from partner status. Others whispered about replacing him altogether. But Donovan, ever the survivor, knew he had one move left. He had to apologize publicly. 3 days later, a large industry conference brought together the city's top law firms and corporate giants. Sterling Global Ventures had a keynote spot. Elijah was scheduled to speak. Donovan saw it as his chance. The room was packed. Glass chandeliers sparkled overhead. Waiters moved like shadows through the crowd. Elijah stood backstage, reviewing his notes, when Donovan approached. This time, he didn't wear the smirk. No bravado, just quiet tension. Elijah looked up. "Mr. Hale." Donovan hesitated. "I owe you an apology." There was a pause. Elijah folded his hands behind his back. "Do you? I judged you before I knew you. I disrespected you. That was wrong. I am sorry." Elijah studied him. Eyes unreadable. "Is this for me or for your firm?" Donovan didn't answer at first. Then, voice low, he said, "Both." Elijah stepped closer. "If it's for me, then let me ask you something. Would you have said those words if I was still just legal counsel? If I didn't own a piece of the empire?" Donovan looked down. "That's what I thought," Elijah said quietly. "This isn't about respect, it's about fear. Fear of being outmaneuvered by a black man who didn't come from your world, but still rose higher than you thought possible." Donovan swallowed hard. "I deserve that. You deserve more," Elijah said. "But I'm not here for revenge, Hale. I'm here to build something better." Donovan met his eyes. "Then let me help." Elijah stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the stage. "Then watch and learn." When Elijah stepped onto the stage, the room erupted. CEOs, attorneys, investors all turned to listen. He spoke not just of mergers or profits, but of purpose. "We cannot build the future with the same bricks that built injustice," he said. "If the rooms of power remain closed to the people who know struggle, then we are only building taller prisons." He told his story, not with bitterness, but with resolve. "When I walked into my first courtroom, a judge asked me if I was the defendant. I was wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. And still, I was misjudged. That moment didn't break me. It forged me." He looked out across the crowd, locking eyes with Donovan for one fleeting second. "And now I stand here not just as a lawyer, not just as a partner, but as a reminder. That talent, that vision, that power, they wear every color. And if you refuse to shake a hand because of the skin it's wrapped in, then one day you may find that hand signing the deal that decides your future." The applause was thunderous. After the conference, reporters swarmed him. Offers flooded in. Law students wrote him letters. Donovan watched it all from a distance, humbled, reflective, quiet. That night, he sat in his office again, but this time he opened a different file, a resume. He stared at it, then at his phone, and dialed a number. "Maya," he said when the young assistant answered. "Can you ask Mr. King if he'd meet me for coffee? Just coffee. No business. I think I need to listen more than I talk." Maya hesitated. "Then I'll ask." 2 days later, Donovan walked into a Harlem cafe Elijah had chosen. The walls were painted with murals. Old jazz spilled from the speakers. A grandmother was scolding a boy in the corner. It was a world far from the penthouse boardrooms Donovan knew. But Elijah was there, waiting. Donovan sat. "You didn't have to come." "I didn't," Elijah agreed. "But I believe people can grow. Even you." There was silence. Then Donovan asked quietly, "Why did you show me grace?" Elijah leaned forward. "Because you didn't deserve it. And that's what makes it grace." And just like that, the conversation began, not about law or power or money, but about change, real change, human change. Donovan listened. For the first time in a long time, that first coffee meeting didn't change Donovan Hale overnight, but it cracked something open in him, a wall, a certainty, a long-standing lie he'd mistaken for truth. They talked for hours about race, power, law, privilege, not mistakes. Donovan admitted things he'd never said out loud, that growing up in Connecticut, he'd never been taught to question his advantage, that most of his mentors looked exactly like him, that he didn't think of himself as racist, just practical. But practical had become the mask he wore to justify comfort, and that mask had blinded him. Elijah didn't let him off easy, but he didn't belittle him either. He challenged. He clarified. And at one point, when Donovan quietly said, "I think I've spent my whole life afraid of what I didn't understand," Elijah simply nodded and said, "You're not the only one." That struck Donovan harder than any courtroom loss. They parted without promises. Just a firm handshake, this time offered by Elijah, taken by Donovan. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. Just a beginning. Back at Wexler and Hale, Donovan found himself seeing everything differently. He noticed how few black associates there were in their offices. He paid attention to who got invited to the big meetings. He started listening to junior lawyers, really listening. And more than that, he started advocating. He didn't tell people why. He didn't mention Elijah. He just began changing. It confused his colleagues at first. Some thought he was playing politics. Others assumed he'd lost a bet. But one day, when a young black paralegal named Andre Watkins was presenting a case summary, and a senior partner interrupted him, Donovan spoke up. "Let him finish," Donovan said. The room paused. Andre blinked. "Thank you," he said quietly. Later that afternoon, Andre found Donovan in the hallway. "Sir, I just wanted to say that meant a lot." Donovan nodded. "You're good at what you do. You deserve to be heard." Andre looked at him for a long time, then smiled faintly. "You ever meet Elijah King?" Donovan smiled back. Yeah, I did." Elijah, meanwhile, was navigating his own battle. Success didn't quiet the doubters. It just made their voices more dangerous. Anonymous threats, boardroom microaggressions, industry whispers calling him aggressive or too political. Sterling Global had welcomed him because of his brilliance, but some executives still didn't see him as equal. Then came the merger with Wayland Industries, a behemoth of a company, billion-dollar deal, high stakes. And Wayland's lead counsel, a woman named Victoria Langston, sharp as glass, older, and very, very white. From the first meeting, she bristled at Elijah. I just want to make sure we're not overcomplicating things," she said. Her tone clipped, eyes on Elijah's revisions. "Your suggestions are ambitious." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious isn't a flaw, it's a standard." She smiled tightly. "Well, some of us prefer realism. I've made realism a career," Elijah said calmly. "It's the reason this deal hasn't collapsed under its own weight." The tension was instant afterward. She pulled Sterling's CEO, Harold Grant, aside. "I think Mr. King is perhaps too emotionally invested," she whispered. "Maybe we need a more neutral presence." Harold, a decent man who nonetheless struggled with confrontation, said, "I'll talk to him." But Elijah had already heard about it through the grapevine. The whispers, the coded language, too emotional, too ambitious. He'd heard it all before, and it stung less each time, but it still stung. That night, he stood alone in his office, staring out at the skyline again, remembering every time he'd been told he wasn't enough, every time he'd been underestimated, misjudged, erased. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He called his mother. "Baby," she said, her voice soft with sleep. "Everything all right?" Elijah paused. "You ever get tired of fighting?" She chuckled gently. "Every day," he smiled. "And what do? I remind myself who I am. And then I get up and do it again." He closed his eyes. "That's what I needed to hear. You got this, Eli. You always have." The next day, Donovan Hale did something unthinkable. He called Elijah. "I heard about Langston," he said. "And I know that type." Elijah smirked. "Do you now? I used to be that type." Elijah laughed, surprised. "That's progress." "I want to help," Donovan said. "If you'll let me." Elijah hesitated. "Then meet me at Sterling tomorrow. We're renegotiating the equity split. You want me in the room. I want your voice. Let's see if you can use it for good." When Victoria Langston entered the boardroom, her expression barely flickered at the sight of Donovan sitting beside Elijah. "I wasn't aware we were inviting guests," she said. Donovan smiled. "Just here to observe." Elijah gestured to the documents. "Let's begin." For the next 2 hours, Elijah led with precision and fire. Victoria pushed back with ice and calculation. But when she leaned too hard, tried to twist a clause, Donovan spoke. "Actually," he said, "Mr. King's reading of that clause protects both parties." "We'd be foolish to dismiss it." Victoria blinked. "You agree with him?" Donovan nodded. "I do. It wasn't just about law. It was about solidarity." By the end of the meeting, Victoria was smiling less, and Elijah's terms had been fully accepted. When the room cleared, Elijah turned to Donovan. "Not bad," he said. Donovan chuckled. "Don't get soft on me, King." "Never." They shared a look, then a nod. No words needed. Months passed. The deal finalized. Sterling soared. Elijah's name became synonymous with reform and power. He launched a new initiative, the King Fellowship, offering scholarships and mentorships for underrepresented law students. One morning, Andre Watkins, now a junior associate, stood in front of a crowd of interns and said, "I never thought I'd be here, but someone believed in me, and someone else stood up for me when it counted." He paused. "That's what changes the game." In the back, Donovan listened silently, eyes glistening. Later, as people filed out, Elijah clapped a hand on Donovan's shoulder. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Elijah asked. Donovan shook his head. "Not in a million years. You still got work to do." "I know, but you're walking the road." Donovan met his eyes. "Thanks to you." Elijah smiled, slow and warm. "Nah, thanks to you finally listening." They both laughed, and in that laugh, there was something bigger than apology. There was healing. The momentum of change was no longer just an undercurrent. It was a tide. Sterling Global's new leadership model began turning heads across the legal and corporate worlds. Elijah's equity reform policies, his hiring initiatives, and his visibility as a Black executive operating at the apex of power made him not just a force, but a phenomenon. Young lawyers quoted his speeches. Law schools cited his clauses. Investment firms began reevaluating their diversity optics. But Elijah wasn't interested in token gestures. He wanted structural change or nothing at all. One morning, he sat in a quiet office overlooking Brooklyn. Not his Sterling office, this one was different, smaller, hallowed. This was the law center he had co-founded in honor of his mother, Ethel King Legal Initiative for Justice. He walked the halls, hearing voices of students in the mock trial room, the clatter of keyboards in research cubicles, the scratch of pens in the community clinic where pro bono lawyers helped tenants avoid eviction. His world wasn't just in glass towers. It was also here, in hardwood classrooms and secondhand chairs, where first chances were being written from scratch. Donovan walked in, wearing jeans for the first time in years. "Wasn't sure if you were serious when you invited me here," he said. Elijah smiled. I don't invite people I'm not serious about. They walk through the center together, Donovan absorbing everything like it was another planet. Kids of every race, first-gen law students, professors in hoodies. A mural of Thurgood Marshall on the wall with the words, "Equal justice is not optional." "This place," Donovan said softly. "This is the real thing, isn't it?" Elijah nodded. "This is where the future gets built." They stepped into a conference room where a group of interns were gathered. Elijah introduced Donovan without embellishment. "This is Donovan Hale," he said. "He's made a lot of mistakes, but now he's learning to be part of the solution." Donovan didn't flinch. He looked the students in the eyes. "I used to think I knew everything," he said. "Then I met Mr. King." The room chuckled. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Donovan continued, voice humbler than it had ever been. "I'm here to say, sometimes you have to lose the argument to win your soul. And sometimes the person you underestimate ends up being the one you learn the most from." Afterward, as they walked out, Elijah looked at him sideways. "You rehearsed that?" Donovan laughed. "Only in my head. About 100 times." They stood outside, the wind brushing past. Elijah looked toward the skyline. "It's funny." "What is?" "How much weight a single handshake carries." Donovan nodded slowly. "I still think about that moment. I wish I could take it back." "You can't." "I know. But you've built something better in its place." They stood in silence. Two men who had once been enemies in everything but law, now bound by something deeper truth. Repentance, respect. "Come to dinner tonight," Elijah said. "My mother's in town." Donovan's eyes widened. "Your mother? She's been asking about you. Is that a good thing?" Elijah smirked. "Depends how honest you plan to be." That evening, in a brownstone in Harlem, Ethel King opened the door and looked Donovan up and down. "You're the one who wouldn't shake my baby's hand," she said, arms crossed. Donovan, for once in his life, didn't have a single slick word. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "and I regret it more than you know." She eyed him for a long time, then opened the door wider. "Well," she said, "let's see if you know how to eat fried catfish." Dinner was loud, full of laughter and stories. Elijah's sister teased him about being on magazine covers. His nephews asked Donovan if he was a bad guy turned good. Donovan answered with grace. "At one point," Ethel leaned over to him, "I watched my son struggle through places that weren't made for him," she said, "and he never stopped. But you forget what it cost him to stand in that room with you." "Don't ever forget." "I won't," Donovan whispered. Later that night, as they walked Elijah's mother home, Donovan said quietly, "Your mother, she's remarkable." Elijah nodded. "I am who I am because of her." They walked in silence for a moment more. Then Donovan said, "There's something I've been thinking about." "Yeah, I want to start a scholarship," Donovan said, "for law students from underserved communities, not just black students. Anyone who's been told no before they ever got the chance to try." Elijah turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Your name on it?" Donovan shook his head. "No, I want it to be anonymous. Not for legacy, for impact." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's the first real thing you've said all day." Donovan laughed. "Coming from you, I'll take that as the highest compliment." "You should." Months passed, and then, one day, something strange happened. A young, white law student approached Elijah after a guest lecture at NYU. Nervous, stuttering slightly, he asked, "Mr. King, I'm sorry. Can I ask you something personal?" Elijah nodded. "Go ahead." "That story you told about the lawyer who wouldn't shake your hand, that was real. Very. What happened to him?" Elijah looked at the student for a long moment. Then he said, "He changed. And the world changed a little with him." The student smiled. "That gives me hope." Elijah clasped the young man on the shoulder. "Then we're doing something right." Back at Wexler and Hale, Donovan Hale sat in his corner office, not because of entitlement, but because he'd earned his seat again. Earned it differently. He promoted Andre to senior associate. He recommended a new partner, Kimberly G., a brilliant woman from Queens who had won 3 landmark discrimination cases before age 30. He donated every cent of his quarterly bonus to the King Fellowship. No one knew, but Elijah did. One afternoon, a package arrived at Donovan's office. Inside was a single photograph. It was from the Sterling merger day. Elijah was standing at the head of the table. Donovan was just behind him, half-shadowed, listening intently. On the back, Elijah had written, "You finally heard me." That made all the difference. No signature, just the initials. E.K. Donovan framed the photo and hung it in his office, right above the couch, not the desk, where people would see it if they sat and stayed. Years passed, and one day, Donovan found himself at a funeral. It was for Harold Grant. The former Sterling CEO Elijah stood at the podium, giving the eulogy, composed and reverent. The room was full of titans, but all eyes were on him. When he finished, he walked down the aisle, and as he passed Donovan, he stopped. "You ever think about what we were once?" Elijah asked quietly. Donovan looked up. "Every day," Elijah smiled. "It's strange, isn't it, that something as small as a handshake could have changed everything? But maybe it had to happen that way," Donovan said. "Maybe we needed the break to find the bridge." Elijah considered that. Maybe so. He extended his hand. Donovan took it. This time, no hesitation, no silence, no shame, just hands, two men equal, whole. And somewhere, in the stillness of that moment, was the echo of every voice that had ever been ignored, every door that had ever been closed, every battle that had ever been fought with dignity in the face of cruelty. In that moment, they didn't rewrite history. They simply honored it by finally getting it right.